Hi, this is Adam from ClockSpring. What I'm going to do today is do a sample integration, pulling some insurance providers from a sample database provided by a CMS implementation vendor into a ServiceNow CMDB in the contract table. So basically what we're looking for is to move the data from one system to another. So to start, what I'm going to do is just grab one of these processors. And for a generic instantiation like this, what we do is just to generate flow file as a way to start the integration. So I'll double click on this and we'll see the details here. I'm just going to rename it to instantiate integration. I'm going to update the schedule. By default, it's going to run continuously. I'll just run this every day. So the next thing that we need is from the CMS site. If you go down to the bottom of the page, we have some sample data sources, some reference implementation here. I'm looking at this particular one. This is the Logica Health FHIR insurance plan data set. So clicking on this, I see some data. I'm going to update this to raw JSON. So this is really the data that we're looking for. This is what we want to get from this data set into our contract database. Now, in order to do that, here inside the ClockSpring platform, I'm going to grab a new process group, and I'm going to import this from our source repository. And I've already got this execute HTTP request here in version control. So I'll import this. Now, to connect these two, just click, drag the line from one to the other. I'm going to the input in this subprocess. And once I start this, what we'll see is we'll just see one item in the queue waiting for processing. Double clicking into this group, and I can take a look at some of the requirements. So basically what this does is it just executes an HTTP GET request or PUT request against a particular target. So to get the flow moving, I'm just going to start this input. And you can see that item in the queue is now inside here. Next step in the process is to actually perform that HTTP execution. So if I hover over this caution sign here, it says the remote URL is not a valid URL, which makes sense because we haven't done any of the configuration. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to grab this URL. It's in JSON format. If I double click on this item here, I'll set the remote URL to the target URL that we're looking for. And once I start this, we should have some data. And yes, we do. So we have a response. Something to note, so we do have a couple error handling conditions here. Pause request if we have a retry condition. Normally we get these if it's like a server error, some type of configuration which may resolve into a better state sometime in the future, like a server 500 error. We have a different failure state here, which is like a true failure. This is going to be your 400 errors. You send it to the wrong location, you put the URL name in wrong, but something that is not recoverable will send to a different failure state. But right now everything looks good, so let's handle this success condition. So what I'm going to do, I know the data is JSON, and I know there's a lot of JSON in here. So I'm going to update with a new processor, and I'm just going to split JSON, right? Because I know there's multiple records inside this data set, and I want to see all of them. So again, moving the line from, so I've got an unrecoverable error, the success output port. And then I will start all of the processors in here, and we should see, again, that one item in the queue, which is 34 kilobytes, is the data that we're looking for. Now I right-clicked on here to take a look at the queue. I've got a couple options here, but what I like to look at here is this little eyeball, which lets me view the data in flight. And we've got an error. So we've got no viewer registered for this content type. The content type here is application FHIR JSON. Now, NiFi right out of the box does not have a mechanism to read this data. So let's do a quick update and we can take a look and view the data. So I've got an update attribute processor, which will just update the content type from that FHIR type into something that the UI can process easily. So again, the little caution sign says success is invalid. So I'm just going to draw a line here for the success relationship. And now I need to select the attributes that I want to update. So what I'm looking for is just the MIME type. And I need to just tell it it's JSON data. So application JSON. Now when I start this processor, we see we still have the one item in the queue. But now with that eyeball, we can actually see the data. So this is the response that the web server gave us, and now it's in a format that we can easily take a look at. So what I'm going to do is really the important data here is the entries. I've got, and it's a JSON array with multiple entries for these insurance providers. So I'm going to just select all of this data, and there's this great online website called jasonpath.com, which makes it really easy to parse this type of JSON data and extract the information that we're looking for. So what we've got is we've got the resource type, it's a bundle. We've got this top level entry, which is actually called entry. So I'm going to update this to read entry. And now we see all of this stuff on the top here has just kind of been abstracted. Now we've got a whole bunch of entries. And we can also see that it's an array. So if I set it to entry.star, now it's no longer an array, but it's a distinct set of elements. And this is really what we want in order to start parsing this data. We want to break the one giant request into a bunch of distinct elements. So going back to the NiFi application, in my split JSON processor, I've got a JSON path expression, which is what we just found here via JSON path. I just paste this in. We should be able to get a few records out of this initial data set. Next processor I'm going to run it's going to be similar. Again, we're looking at JSON data, so I want to evaluate the JSON data. So again, I'm going to draw the line. Now here we've got a couple options. Right, so we've got relationships, we've got failure, we've got original, and we've got split. What I'm really interested in right now is the split data. So this will be all of the individual data points within the large data set. So that's where I want to route to the next phase. I've also got a failure condition. For example, something happened, maybe the data format wasn't right, something happened that we weren't able to split it properly, need to be able to handle that failure. In this case, I'm just going to log that data. I've got a log message processor, and what this does, it'll just write to the generic server log for processing. So I'm going to move any types of failures into the log message processor, and it'll go to the server log for later. This one also has a little caution flag. It says relationship success is invalid. So really all we need to do here is just terminate the success condition so that in the event that we have a failure, it will log the message and it will stop processing at that point. I still have an issue here. Relationship original is invalid. So the original relation is this one piece. So I have the option, I can take the split data. I can also move that original data somewhere else. Well, at this point, I don't really need to. I'm only interested in that split data. So I'm going to automatically terminate the original flow so it won't go anywhere from here. Now, when I start this split JSON processor, it should turn this one record into multiple records. And it did. So now I have 20 individual insurance providers, all about 1.25 kilobytes. Let's take a look and let's see if we can find some interesting data on here. Now it pulls in. It's no longer pretty printed, but we have this formatted option, so I can see it in and easier to read. So it's no longer just one line. We can actually take a look and see what we have here. So I've got resource. Yes, I know it's an insurance plan. I do see a unique ID here. HPID looks interesting. It's a commercial PPO plan, and this is Persona. Looks like Connecticut Silver PPO plan. Let's take a look at another one, and let's see if there's anything else that stands out here. So the previous ID, I think, was 400,000. This one's 500,000. So this looks like it's a relatively unique ID. So I think we'll use this as our key going forward. So now what we need to do is we need to pull this data out. So again, I'm going to just select all the data, move into our evaluator, and let's see if we can figure out how to get this data out. So what do I want first? The first thing I want to do, all right, so we've got this unique ID here. Let's see if we can figure out how to grab this value. So it's resource, identifier, value. All right. So we'll start at the resource. You can just use the dot to grab identifier. All right, that looks good. And value. All right, that did not work. All right, go back to identifier. Oh, it's an array. So we just do sub-0 here to grab the first element in that array and the value, and now we have that unique ID. So I can take this JSON path expression. I'm going to close this tab here because I don't need that anymore. And with evaluate JSON path, first thing I'm going to do is the destination by default is content. I'm going to update this to attributes, which we can use later as variables as this flow continues. Now we need to set the attribute. I'll hit the plus icon here, and we can give it an attribute name. Now, since I'm putting this into ServiceNow, I already know that it's the vendor contract ID is where I want to send it. I've already got the JSON path to show where to find that key. All right, and that will work for that contract ID or that unique ID. So going back to the evaluator, there were some other things that we were interested in here, like the it's a commercial PPO plan. So let's take a look. That's also a resource. Looks like a type, coding, display. So resource.type. All right, we can see here that it's also an array. Looks like I have two dots in here. Doesn't really matter, but yeah, resource type. All right, we have an array, so let's grab that first element again. Let's grab coding, which is also an array, and I'll grab that display name. What was it? Display. All right, and that's commercial PPO. So I'm going to copy this, go back to our data flow, and I'm going to set this as the description. All right, and let's see if there's anything interesting, anything else that we want in here. There we go. Let's grab this, the resource name. And that looks like it's pretty easy. Just resource.name. All right, yeah, Persona of Connecticut Gold PPO. So just grab this, and let's put this as the short description. All right, so at this point, what we're going to have is some attributes, and now we need to do something with it. We're able now, we've extracted the data that we got from that DaVinci data set. Let's get it into ServiceNow. So I'm going to grab a new process group. Again, out of the box, we've got some connectors. This time, I'm going to select ServiceNow. Don't want to create an incident. I want to create a new record. Perfect. So I'm going to create a new record via the ServiceNow API. Now let's double click on this and we'll see what the requirements are. So for this one, we are looking for a table name as an attribute, and then the attributes that we want to put into that record. So first thing we'll do is I'm going to move anything that's matched. So this is, hey, we matched the data. We were able to extract the records. I'm going to move failure again back to our log entry. Let's just make this a little bit cleaner, put some right angles in there. And unmatched as invalids, I will just terminate that. Now when I start this, again, we've got the 20 items in the queue. Going to take a look and we'll see a little bit different data here. So this little, the letter I icon here, if you want to click on that, under the attributes, you can now see some of the attributes that we pulled. So I've got the description that we pulled out. Got some other metadata, so I know, hey, this is the URL that I requested to get this data. Here's a short description and the vendor contract ID that we were looking for. Kick this off and we'll see this in here. All right, so in order to get this set, we'll need to set the table, and we'll do that again with an update attribute processor. So let's drag that onto the canvas here. And this just lets us set like a static type attribute. So like while this is running, I can alter the flow. So now I can update that attribute. I'm just going to connect the success criteria back down. And the table that we're looking for in ServiceNow is table. It's AST contract. Now the other thing that we want to set here is the contract type. ServiceNow, that's the contract model column. We'll just say it's insurance. So the next thing I'm going to do is convert it to JSON, which is what ServiceNow likes to use for the update. So now if I look at the queue here, we'll see that it's changed. So previously it was a result from that DaVinci sample database. Now it is the result of some of the attributes that we pulled. So I've got the short description here as persona of Connecticut, a couple other attributes which you don't really care about that just came out of the box. But yeah, here's my description. Here's the table that we're putting it into and the model that we're looking for. So next phase is we actually need to execute the request. Caution sign here says the username and remote URL reference some variables. So we have the concept of global variables, and they are stored. So I've already got these set for the ServiceNow information. What I can do is I can just hit this little gear here. So for this group, it says no parameter context. I'm just going to set this to my ServiceNow instance. And this is basically just a repository of global variables. So it's going to be the URL, the username, the credentials that we're using. So you can basically just set it in one place and use it in multiple places. So now that that's applied, we see the little stop sign. Since we do have some sensitive values here, the basic authentication password, I do need to reset that. But we do have, quick code completion. So basically I just hit the hash sign, the open brace, type in the S and hit space, and it will code complete all of the available sensitive properties that I have. And right now it's just a ServiceNow password. Now when I execute, again, I have the option for the failure states. We start this, let's see what happens. So for these 20 records, I did a post request to ServiceNow, and the post will create a new record. Let's look at the queue and see what we got. And I do have some results. And this is the full data set. So we only added a couple attributes here. We've got that vendor contract that we added. Here's obviously the table, the description that we added. So let's go over to ServiceNow and let's see that data. So I'm just going to search for the contract table. I'll search for insurance. The contract number was HPID. And we do have 20 results. So that's it. We just took data from one system, we moved it to the other system. Didn't take long at all. Now, we do have a problem. We are just inserting data. So there's an issue in that if this record already exists in ServiceNow, if I run this integration again, it's going to create another record. It's going to duplicate that data, which we really don't want. So let's update our flow a little bit to account for that. So here we're creating the record. What we need to do actually beforehand is query ServiceNow and see if we can find that data. So again, I've got my ServiceNow connectors. I don't want to create an incident. I want to query a table. So this will query an arbitrary ServiceNow table, which is exactly what we're looking for. I need to stop this so that I can move the request, because you need to look before you write. So yeah, input ServiceNow request for matched, nothing else changes, and we are good to go. Just gonna update the line a little bit here. I am going to just restart this processor. So if I stop and start it, it's going to kick it off again. And very quickly, we are back to 20 records. And these are the 20 records from that DaVinci data set, which we need to update. Now, we've got to test this update. So I'm just going to delete 2 of these records so that we have some new records and we have some existing records to update. Okay, so now we have 18 in our database. We've got 20 total. So let's take a look. We're going to do a new ServiceNow query. And what are we looking for? JSON document detailing the table. All right, so what do we need here for our input? I need the table, and I need the query that we're going to execute. So we can do this again via that update attribute processor. Again, we'll just reconnect some lines. The table is AST contract. And the query we're looking for was the vendor contract. And remember, we have that vendor contract already pulled out as an attribute in this flow file. All right, we open up that queue again, click on the little I to look at the attributes. So this first request will do a ServiceNow query for HPID 410,000. So once I route the success here, we should be ready to execute the request. Now one thing we're missing is we're missing the password, so we've got to get that set again. Again, it's pulling from that parameter context. Let's fire this off and see what happens. All right, we have 20 pieces of data back. Let's take a look. Now you can see most of them are 1.6, 1.7 kilobytes, and we have 2 that are only 13 bytes. These are the ones that we don't have records in ServiceNow. They were not able to pull any data back. You can take a look, and yes, it is a null result set. So going back to the parent flow, we need to handle the output. So again, we'll just take a look at the JSON path, and we'll pull out the sysid, which is our unique key, which we'll need to do the updates. So from that success response, we'll start all of this, and we will see again those 20 items in the queue. Let's take a look at the queue. We'll go back to our JSON path online evaluator so we can pull out that sysid. Copying that data. So if we look on here, we've got the result. Again, it's an array. We'll grab that first item, sysid, and that is our unique identifier in ServiceNow for this particular record. So my JSON path evaluator, again, we want to set the attribute. To that path that we defined. So now we've got the sysid set. We have all the information that we need to branch the data. So I've got a different processor. It's a new one. We haven't seen this before, but it's for route. So I can route on attribute. Pass anything that's matched. In this case, I'm going to terminate any failures or unmatched. Now when we start this, we'll have that 20 records. Some of them will have a sysid set, some of them that value will be null. So now I'm going to look for those null values. And what we're looking for is anything that's empty. So again, I'm going to look at my variable, which we have set, for anything that equals the empty string. So this means anything that is empty means that we don't have a record for it. And in that case, we can go and we can create that new record. So only on those empty sets. Now for those records, or those rows where we do have a value in ServiceNow, we want to update it. Now from this create ServiceNow record, it's going to be really close to this. So I'm just going to copy this, this processor. Can do a quick copy. Paste. And now we're no longer creating the record. We're updating. So going back to that parent flow, I'm going to draw the line from unmatched to update. Now unmatched is not a very good name. So I'm just going to edit the configuration and we will say not empty, because I know we have the data there. So if I start this route, we should see 18 in one place and 2 in another. Now this one, it's already started, so I see 2 came in and 2 went out. We did create those new records already without even having to try. Now I've got 18 records here that we need to update. So again, we'll go into this newly cloned update ServiceNow record processor. Start this. Let's look at the update attribute. We are still going to the contract. We don't want to update the contract model because since this is an update, it's possible, however unlikely, that the contract model in the database may be something other than insurance. We do not want to update that. So I'm just going to delete this option here. And now I've got 18 records to execute that request to ServiceNow. You're inserting a new record The HTTP method is a post. If we're doing an update, we do need to switch this to a patch, and that will update only the fields that are set in that JSON that we're going to be sending. The other thing that we need to do is we need to tell it what record we're patching. So here we're updating the ServiceNow base URL and that AST contract table. But we need to tell it that we're also updating a particular sysid. And the password is already set because this is a clone. So if I start this, let's see what happens. Oh, we've got 18 responses. So we updated those 18 records. All right, so now what we're going to do, we need to handle those success criterias. I'm just going to do a new processor, and we'll do a quick log message. We'll send the results to the log. We do want to record that we did have a success. So we'll start this process and this one, and again for that log message, we will just terminate it. We don't have any other actions that we need to do. So we'll start that processor, and we are done. So what have we done here so far? Going to the top of the flow, we've just started it. We do an external request to the DaVinci Logica Health dataset, that sample dataset. We pulled on those insurance records. We convert them into 20 individual records. We query our central database, looking for anything that exists so that we can either update the existing record or insert new records based on the result of that query. If we don't have a new record, we'll create a new one. If we do have an existing record, we'll update just those specific attributes so that if some other process or some other application or individual sets some data that we don't have in that authoritative remote data set, it will not overwrite it. And that is the end of this demonstration. I really hope you liked it. Hope it was interesting and potentially useful. Thank you very much for your time.